Hello and welcome to the DY monthly community call, discussing all things related to Helium governance, technical matters, and hips. My name is Jamie Wilkinson. I'm a board member at the Decentralized Wireless Alliance, aka the DY, and I am pleased to be your host this morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome. Like I mentioned, we're starting on time this week. We're trying to start on time this week since we have a very busy agenda. You can see folks just going crazy in the edits. But to kick things off, I'd love to throw it over to Scott to introduce yet more DY staffing changes.
Thank you, Jamie. Everyone can hear me, just making sure I'm off mute. Wonderful. So the foundation team continues to grow. Very excited. We've got more resources through grants, as we welcomed Jess and Clarissa. Continue to staff up to support areas around community management, governance framework, just larger team in general. We're going to continue to add to this year to make sure we can effectively support our growing community of people who are looking to build onto the network, use the network.
Hey, I have a question.
Sorry, look, yes.
Please ignore. Go ahead, Scott.
All right. Anyway, so I want to pass it off to Edda, who is our most recent hire who joined the team today. This week. Edda, if you want to give a little bit of an intro about yourself. Really excited that she is here and ramping up this week.
Yeah, super. Thank you so much. So hi, everybody. My name is Edda, and I'm super excited to have joined the DY team this week. I'll be basically working on community and developer relations. I'm super enthusiastic about the Web3 space, started my own blog, just writing about what's happening in the crypto Web3 ecosystem, and basically love growing, like bringing more people inside. Going to my background, I've been in networking space for the past 2.5 years, working in technical sales. Previously was a software engineer, and yeah, fell deep down the crypto Web3 rabbit hole, and super excited to be joining the team. I just love the technology, got hooked to the communities, quite involved in a few developer communities as well, and really looking forward to working and growing together. Back to you, Jamie and Scott.
Thank you, Edda. And a note to all participants too, if you are a jerk, you will be banned ruthlessly. And if that continues to happen, I will have to revoke everybody's unmuting privileges. Thank you very much, Edda. Really such a pleasure to have you on the team. Scott, any closing remarks?
Nope, just excited to have the team to do it. I realize also, Evan, I don't know if we actually did a public welcome for you yet, so don't want to completely put you on the spot, but Evan was one of our, actually was a grant recipient for a lot of the analytics work around anti-gaming, so we also brought him on as our first data engineer hire. There was an announcement in Discord, but Evan, I don't know if you had a chance to fully welcome yourself. So if you want to just give a quick hello to everybody, talk a little bit about your background would be great to share.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Evan Dewald. I've been involved with the community in different facets for a little bit now. So I'm excited to dive into helping build up the data infrastructure at DY and work on some analytics and research. So hoping to meet anyone who's involved in those types of efforts. Yeah, thanks.
It's one fellow data nerd to another. Evan, also so glad to have you. It's great.
That's with me. Back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Up next, we've got our usual updates from the MOC and the DY Grants Committee. So I'll throw it first to Jeremy for the update from the MOC.
Or germ works, but thanks for that, Jamie. So MOC is the Manufacturing Oversight Committee, and we've got a few updates here. One, we have an official sort of charter, which we all work together to really outline what we think our powers are, where we can work on things, what's overstepping the bounds, and that is public. That's in the meeting notes here. If you look under the agenda where it says Germ Mock Update, there's a little link, and you can see that public. And definitely welcome public input to that from the community. And some things we're looking for is to sort of extend the group to get more expertise, especially from resellers, possibly, maybe even manufacturers who can maybe not sit as voting members, but sit as advisors and who we can solicit immediate, quick input from as we come up with various decisions and changes to the process. And speaking of which, we've got I last counted about 62 vendors in various states who are applying to manufacture hotspots. That's varying states that may be a bit bigger than what you see if you count it on your own scheme. For me, that's anybody who's applied for HIP 19 and hasn't yet been approved. So with that, we're also trying to really shift the focus on who we approve. We're making a slight change in the process so that we can get in touch with applicants earlier if the whole mock really feels that they're not a good fit. And we're really looking for manufacturers. Now that we have so many manufacturers, we have a lot of kind of this flywheel effect going on. We have so much more choice now, and we can be a bit more picky. And we really want to see more vendors who have experience, particularly in telecom and radio. We don't really want applicants who are applying who sort of have mining experience or anything that just sort of general compute. We really want to see that radio component and telecom in the vendor's application and demonstrating experience in that. So we're going to be a bit more picky, and we're going to make this process a little faster in turning vendors down if we think they're really not in it for the long haul or in it for a good way. So that's the latest with the mock.
Thank you, Germ. Always appreciate it. Up next, I have Clarissa and Jess listed for the Grants Update Committee, but feel free to fight over who goes first.
Yeah. We've already done that fight and I won. I'll go first. So a couple quick updates around the grants program ecosystem development. So one of our focuses in ecosystem development is connecting with innovation hubs that are already supporting IoT founders and can help us find groups of potential grantees building LoRaWAN applications. And so we're doing some work to continue to build out those relationships. And along with proposals for infrastructure and education, we're interested in finding all kinds of LoRaWAN IoT applications that show what the future powered by Helium can look like. We're particularly interested in several spaces that we mentioned in the latest blog post. So public good is one, agriculture and environmental monitoring is another, smart cities and buildings is another area that we're interested in, and logistics and supply chain management. And we're also ramping up our participation in the growing community by speaking to groups, classes, meetups that are exploring IoT, wireless connectivity, or crypto. If you're a part of a group or a meetup or some sort of community that you think would be interested in the grants program, please feel free to hit me up, find me on Discord. We would love to talk to you about maybe even supporting your group or event. And we're excited to see collaboration across the community. So community members are connecting with each other on Discord and finding ways to pool skills and create strong grant proposals. And I wanted to give a special shout out to Joe and Josh from Grant 27 for collaborating with other members of the community to put together promising grant proposals. They linked up with Jennifer from Minor Match and they have started to build out a promising path forward together. We want to keep seeing this and find more ways to encourage cross-pollination. So if you have any ideas for that and how to get more members of the community working together, we would love to see that. And yeah, the last update I have is that if there's an educational resource or some infrastructure you think would help the community, there's a good chance we're able to fund you or your team to build it. So anyone deploying a smart device or application on the Helium network has the most insight into the points of friction around educational materials that we need, or more reliable infrastructure or tool UX. So please feel free to apply for a grant or share feedback with the team. And the application process is pretty approachable, so don't be shy. And I'll hand it over to Jess now to talk about grant project updates.
Everyone, thanks, Clarissa. I'm going to give a grants project update and some of the operations that we're working on. We're still getting onboarded and learning about a lot of the existing grant programs. So I want to highlight a few of them we got to meet with this month. Grant number 13 is about environmental monitoring and research. They're basically working to use LoRaWAN to do fire tracking to help build dashboards for researchers and educators, which is really cool. Grant number 16, they're working on quality tea production and systemic supply chain traceability and transparency solutions in India, which is really cool. We're also met with Grant 20, and they're working on IoT-enabled space monitoring, which is pretty fascinating. They have these cool cameras that can track low Earth orbit particles and objects in space, and they're using LoRaWAN devices to be able to track them and send images back. So that's been really exciting to meet with these teams and learn about their projects. We also have a lot of new grant projects coming in, which is amazing. So if you have submitted a grant proposal, we're actively reviewing it and trying to get you reviewed in time so we can and read more about your grant and hopefully get you onboarded. Some other things that we've been doing behind the scenes for operations is strengthening the grants process. One of the things we're doing is working on creating a handbook that would help grantees get onboarded more easily and then help you along your grant program journey. The handbook would help you answer any kind of questions you might have or have any resources you might be able to contact to the grants committee team and help you along the way during your journey. So we have that and a whole bunch of other things going on, but I figured I'd give you some of the highlights for what we're doing within the existing grants projects updates. So thanks, and I'll hand it back to Jamie.
Thank you, Jess and Clarissa. I really appreciate the updates. Super excited about all this new generation of grant making. Smoothly transitioning to our next talk is MadCat/Beaky98 talking about their new HIP 49 LoRaWAN subregion max EIRP limit.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Jamie.
Yeah, no problem. Please take it over.
Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity. So actually, I have a short slide to share, so that everyone is on the same picture. Yeah, everyone can see. Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's starting right now. Yep, there we go.
Yeah. So, hi all. My name is Kikong. Beaky98 on GitHub and MadCat on Discord. Now I'll give a short intro about HIP 49, mainly to cover the proposal and our motivation behind it. All the details can be found on the GitHub. So in our best understanding about POCV 11, which is to comply to local regulatory limits, the HIP 49 is a request from mainly AS923 community to seek Helium's consideration on what POCV 11 has been set out to do. So this proposal is to have the max EIRP limit readjusted based on local regulation of these countries. We can do it by adopting a LoRaWAN subregion config for max EIRP limit. There are also affected countries in the other regions, and this will actually serve them as well. So one of those are North Macedonia. So actually this was done in the pull request earlier on by at Grand Doge. So these are the max EIRP limit for each country based on their own regulatory agency. Pretty much most are in 26 to 27 dBm as compared to the 60 dBm blanket restriction from POCV 11. So in this following slide, we have examples of AS923 countries and how the residential areas is designed. This is an example of Singapore. Many of these countries do follow this style of densely packed buildings to accommodate their population size. So with just 16 dBm, we are not able to penetrate through these buildings sufficiently, and coverage will be very limited. So our main motivation is to restore coverage in these affected countries. Current max EIRP set for the entire AS923 region has led to a significant decrease in the number of beacons witnessed, which translates to a drop in earnings for hotspot owners. And we feel that it's unfair for most of the AS923 countries to be weakened unnecessarily beyond the local regulatory limits. So Helium adoption may be deterred in AS923 countries, especially in those that have yet to have a strong foothold already. So in this example here, before POC V11, the number of biggest witnesses were around 30 to 40 based on the red line on the left side. But after the implementation on the right side, it dropped to less than 20 to 15 per each day. And we can roughly say that it has a huge 50 to 60% drop in those beacon witnesses and our coverage. Here's another example where it was around a good 12 to 20 beacon witness before POC V11, but has dropped down to less than 10 after. So there are plenty more that you can find, but just these two for now. We also had a short discussion with LoRa Alliance regarding their guide. Apologies if the texts here are small. Firstly, plus 16 dBm was used as a default in order to accommodate all device manufacturers, but they are free to use higher or lower transmit power as long as they are compliant to country limits. Additionally, the RP0002 guide was used as a default for end device and not the gateway. Hence, we are actually proposing that Helium should specify ERRP per country, and supporting documents can be provided by the committee to assist the dev team. So for transparency wise, we have the email link of our discussion, and I can post this out on Discord for the team to view as well. So, okay, that's all from me. Yeah, thank you all for listening, and we are open for any questions.
That was fantastic, Key. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any questions for Key related to his proposal?
Yeah, I mean, I've been opposed to this idea, and I'd like to suggest why. So one problem that we see in the LoRaWAN universe is that, so firstly, a little bit of like level setting. So when we designed proof of coverage in the first place, the intention was to sort of mimic sensors because we knew that there wouldn't be any at the start. So we tried to design the system that would sort of pretend as if there were sensors wandering around. It's obviously not perfect because people are mounting hotspots with big antennas on roofs, and that's not how sensors behave. But one of the problems with this proposal, at least as the way I see it, is that there are really no sensors available on the market that have subregions defined the way that you have here. So for example, you know,
I should go back to the, yeah.
So like Switzerland, for example, right, is an EU 868 country that has, I think, a 27 dBm limit. There are no 27 dBm EU 868 sensors that exist anywhere on the market that I've ever seen. And so one thing I think we would want to be careful about here is that you're defining subregions for the behavior of hotspots, but there are no subregions really that exist in the sensor world, at least not in a large scale. All right, that was cool. So I think one of the problems. One of the problems that you might run into here is that you're creating proof of coverage areas that are very much the opposite of the behavior of sensors, because you're not going to find a 27 dBm EU 868 sensor available anywhere, right? And I don't think there are any AS923 sensors that transmit at that power either. So just a consideration. I don't personally think that this is a great idea. I understand the motivation behind it. It's very POC earnings related, but I don't think it helps to actually mimic a coverage area that isn't real, because you can't buy sensors that actually behave this way. So that's just some input that I have.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the feedback. So actually, I was more of thinking of how that with the limiting of that coverage back to just to 16, and then we are actually being very densely populated, and a lot of us, I think a lot of other countries are also having like very restricted coverage. So in that sense, that if we actually try to put in sensors into our countries, actually we are having a very small coverage, and it will be also very difficult for the sensors to even reach whatever that the Helium has been trying to prove out for, which is to do like coverage for the people's network. Yeah.
Hi, sorry if I may add on, right?
Yeah.
Hi, Isian here. Yeah. So basically, adding on to what Kikon has said is basically, Yeah, we understand that 16 dBm is from sensor point of view, but from Hotspot, which is the TX, right, the gateway, essentially this reduces the coverage area as well, right? So that there will be like reduced or no blanket coverage when it's reduced at such a scale. And
that's not necessarily true, right? Like, so for example, in EU 868 today, as implemented, you have a 16 dBm limit for POC transmissions, but for downlinks to sensors, you can actually transmit much higher than that because you can use whatever channel you want for the downlink. So it doesn't have to be the same set of rules. And this is kind of what I worry about, right? Like in LoRaWAN networks, 99.9% of the data is uplink from sensors and not downlinks from hotspots. And so having a very high transmit limit to mimic a sensor coverage area is really sort of disingenuous, because you will end up with a coverage area that looks 4 or 5 times larger than reality. So just again, like you can still downlink for things like join messages and other downlinks on the network using high power without setting the POC limit to be that high. I don't think they're necessarily the same thing. Just my point of view on this. I've thought about this one a lot and always end up back at this opinion where I just don't see how it makes sense to create this huge looking coverage area, which isn't really what sensors would see.
Just jumping in real quickly, it sounds like the reason for bringing this up was starting to see a disparity in earnings after proof of coverage 11. Would it make more sense to propose something that was like a flat area emission across all hotspots, so that one region wasn't necessarily like emitting at a higher power? Or maybe I'm missing something. Maybe that's already the way this is working.
I mean, you could do that. I think it's punitive to particularly the US, right, where there actually are sensors available that transmit at high powers, because it's the entire region has a 27 dBm limit. Or 30 dBm limit. The challenge here is that you've got a mixture, right? Like you've got EU 868, where some regions are 16 dBm and some regions are 27, and you've got AS 923 where it's mixed. And so the US is kind of an anomaly that way. And the problem is that the LoRa sensor manufacturers have just sort of defaulted to the lowest common denominator, which obviously makes sense for them, right? So, like I said, there are no high power sensors available that I'm aware of for any of those regions, and I think that's a little bit problematic, at least from the point of view of like, this is why POC was sort of designed this way, but I understand the motivation.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, or else Key can kind of respond to some of the comments so far.
Yeah, definitely have to respond to a chat comment as well. Yeah, so from Joshua, the comments is what is this in favor of per country ERP maximums? So we are looking into country ERP max limits that we can go for. And then are there any more questions other than that? Yeah. So to our understanding, as well as ERP is affecting TX for hotspot. Yeah, I think we definitely have to have more time for discussion regarding these sensors as well as the hotspot POC thing. So I think we don't have much time left, so I have to give this back to Jamie.
Sure. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And for any follow-up conversation, please check out the HIP49 channel in Discord or the tracking issue on GitHub, which are linked inside of the agenda document. Key, thank you so much for the presentation again. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Up next, do we have Captain Hindsight?
Hello.
Please, welcome. I will briefly screen share your HIP unless you'd like to do so.
No, because I wasn't even aware I was supposed to be attending this evening.
Oh.
Somebody from Bobcat told me last night that my HIP was mentioned and referenced, and I've been given a 15-minute slot. So I've literally just rushed home from work, installed Zoom, and prepared nothing, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, I'm happy to slot you for next month if you'd like, or else feel free to kind of introduce the problem if you'd like to take the time.
I would prefer to put some material together and attend next month and present it then, if that's okay.
You got it. I'll throw you on the agenda. It'll be top of the
Okay.
list.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Sorry for the trouble. Thank you so much. It's great. Moving right along. Amir, we're ahead of schedule miraculously now. Is Tushar on the call as well?
Hey, I'm here.
Right on. Welcome. Would you like to kick off conversation around your new proposals? Or should we, let me see what I can do.
Yeah, I can at least introduce and explain the rationale.
Sure, Amir, please do. Yeah, this is the agenda item listed here is a hold for Tushar around a draft HIP around new network structure, new economic structure and technical structure for the network.
Yes, so just as background, I've personally spent a lot of time thinking about what the sort of layer 2 version of Helium is and how to think about scaling Helium beyond a LoRaWAN network. There have been a couple of HIPs proposed by the Freedom Fi team and others around how to add 5G. And it sort of reminded me of the problem that, 5G or cellular in general is not going to be the last type of wireless network that gets added to Helium. And we're going to run into the same kind of problem every time we look at adding another wireless network, which is how do emissions work, how does proof of coverage work, like how do the networks balance each other? So you've got a single supply of HNT, but you've got multiple different wireless network types with different proof of coverage mechanisms, and how do those coexist and not cannibalize each other? And ultimately, how do we create the same sort of explosive effect of growth that we had with the IoT network for every subsequent network that gets built on Helium? So I had a harebrained idea one day that I mentioned to Tushar and the Multicoin team, and I said, what if there was a way of structuring the network such that there were separate tokens for each type of wireless network that existed in the system, but somehow they were all tied to HNT and data credits were the common way that the network was used. And so that was really all I said. It was like, it sounds like a really interesting idea to do it this way. I have no idea how you would actually implement this or how it makes any sense. But luckily the Multicoin team is much smarter than I am. So they ran with this idea and turned it into a proposal, which I personally think is fantastic and allows the network to grow to potentially an infinite number of network use cases in the future that may or may not even be wireless. Like you could imagine things like decentralized CDNs or VPNs or really any kind of network application that takes advantage of a distributed network of nodes. And I think this proposal is a really interesting idea around how to structure the network and structure the economics to be able to support that kind of growth in the future. So that's all the background. Tushar and team have done some amazing work, and I will stop talking and let them take it away and present all the work that they've done.
Thanks, Amir. Appreciate the background and the context. We have the proposals ready in Google Docs. I can screen share, but I don't know if anyone's gonna be able to read it fast enough for that to actually be useful. So I just want to say, I'll give you a verbal overview, everyone, and we will have all of these up on GitHub today. So you'll be able to read them in full detail. There are a lot of details in this, so please do read through it carefully when it is up there. But I want to start out with the motivations. Like Amir mentioned, we've been thinking a lot about how do we scale Helium to multiple wireless networks. And we've seen a number of proposals from the Freedom Fi team on how to add proof of coverage for 5G. And we think that there's a better way to organize all these wireless networks as a part of the ecosystem. So what we're proposing is creating what we're calling a Helium L1, which is the layer 1 chain, which is where all accounts live. Like all the hotspots, all the accounts live at the L1. But then there is a wireless network protocol specific L2. So there's a LoRaWAN L2, there can be a US 5G L2, there can be an L2 for point-to-point, free space optical laser connection for middle mile. There can be L2s for any type of wireless network. Wi-Fi is another example that can have an L2. And each L2 has its own token, which is issued according to a bonding curve with HNT. This is really important because it means that HNT remains the primary economic asset of the whole ecosystem. Data credits are interoperable between every network. So you can use the same data credits on LoRaWAN or 5G or Wi-Fi or any other network that comes out. But very importantly, each wireless network protocol can govern itself. We've seen now with the evolution of Helium governance that having to put through every wireless network protocol governance change through the broader Helium governance process is inefficient and slow. And it doesn't make sense necessarily to put in every change that 5G network has through a governance process. It also includes the LoRaWAN stakeholders. So by introducing the concept of these new L2 tokens on a per wireless network protocol basis, we create the ability for each of these wireless network protocols to govern themselves. They can govern their own proof of coverage rules. They can govern their own reward ratios between the different stakeholders in the system. They can govern their own pricing. They can even do things like govern whether they should have a blacklist or not, which I know we're talking about later in the agenda. So by opening that up to a per wireless network protocol basis, I think that makes it really interesting. Then the very important question that follows this is, how will HNT emissions be distributed under this proposal? And how do the economics work for miners? So we turn to JMF, who we've worked with previously on a number of proposals, and asked him to assist in coming up with a mechanism for how to distribute the HNT emissions between the different wireless network protocols. That formula is in the GitHub proposal, and I'll turn it over in a moment to JMF to talk about that for a second. But before I turn that over, I just want to talk about why this is so important. Like, what we're creating is a LoRaWAN token, which is like a LoRaWAN L2 that has its own validators for the LoRaWAN network. They do whatever jobs need to be done for the LoRaWAN network, whatever needs to be hosted, whatever interconnections they need to do with other non-Helium systems. All of those are responsibilities of those validators. Those validators also then distribute out LoRaWAN tokens to all of the LoRaWAN hotspots based on the activity that those hotspots do, the coverage that they provide, the data they transfer, just like it works today. Then those hotspots are able to convert their LoRaWAN tokens to HNT if they want to. They don't have to. They can say, actually, I think that the LoRaWAN token is going to appreciate in HNT terms, and they can hold on to it because they think that network is going to continue to grow relative to the rest of the Helium ecosystem. Or they can always convert it back to HNT and continue mining HNT effectively as they always have been. And that is provided for within the protocol, within the bonding curve itself. And the key question is then, how do you allocate the HNT between the different wireless network protocols? So JMF, if you want to talk a little bit about your formula that you put in there, you can pull up the doc if you'd like.
Yeah. I threw the formula, just a screenshot of the formula. So there's really sort of three components. If anybody that was here when we were proposing HIP 37, you'll see almost exactly the same verbiage. We did adjust the formula a little bit. So what we've decided to do is sort of splice HIP 37's economics into this HIP itself, and then the other half of HIP 37 that was run by really the Freedom Fight team and Boris is becoming, I believe, I don't know what HIP number it's going to be now, HIP 53 or 52. So three major components of what we're doing is combining the POC and DC buckets like we discussed in HIP 37. So at the second halving, there will be no specific bucket for POC earnings, no specific bucket for DC rewards. That was essentially taken apart anyways with HIP 10 because the flow over from the data rewards goes to POC anyway. So that's just formalizing. Those are now just one bucket, and that's already sort of true. And then when we look to split what is now sort of that macro bucket between the different wireless network protocols, the equation, we wanted to have something that took into account the amount of DC burn that's occurring because you want to reward the protocols that are doing what we want the network to do, and then we also wanted to take something into account for the size of each of these protocols. So something like LoRa, being so important to the early stages of Helium, we think that there needed to be some mechanism for taking device count into the equation. So what you'll see is a bit of a quadratic equation where you're multiplying the DCs burned by the square root of the number of active devices in any individual protocol. And so what that ends up meaning is that if you have one protocol that has 500,000 active devices on it and another protocol that has 50,000 active devices, the one with only 50,000 will require about 3 times the number of DCs burned to be on par with the larger protocol. And that might seem extreme, and a purist might say, oh, well, whatever the DC burn is really all that matters. But we do think we need to take into account some of these large original protocols as far as how big they are and how important they were to the network. And so that should also handle a lot of that worry about things like 5G coming in and just sweeping the floor with LoRaWAN earnings very, very quickly, because LoRaWAN will have that advantage of just active devices. And then to figure out percentage of total rewards going to any given protocol, all you're doing is dividing that protocol score by the sum of all the protocol scores. So, if LoRaWAN has a protocol score of 50 and the overall sum of all the protocol scores is 100, it's going to get 50% of those rewards. Pretty basic. Let me know if any of you guys have a hard time sort of figuring out how that equation works, or if you have any complaints about the equation. You can DM me directly on Discord at JMF. The last part that really came from speaking with Tushar and Abe and a few other people was there's still a cold start issue. LoRaWAN benefited from POC getting over the cold start issue. So there were rewards for devices before there was any data credit burn. Under this new model, a protocol that has no DC burn will have a 0% score or a 0 score. So they won't get any rewards whatsoever. Obviously, that's problematic. So what we're proposing is a 10% cold start bucket, essentially. And it splits evenly between any protocol that is sub about 2 years old or 1 million epochs, and doesn't already get 10% of the overall rewards bucket. So when something, let's say 5G, even before 2 years, in the prior equation, it ends up getting over 10% of the macro POC bucket rewards, it will actually be taken out of the cold start bucket. So it's not sort of double dipping. And if there's no protocol that fits that sort of description of a either sub or both sub 2 years and not yet 10% of POC rewards, this cold start bucket will just flow back into the larger POC bucket like it doesn't exist at all. So those are the three sort of major components that we're implementing. Again, a lot of it comes from HIP 37. So if you're around for that, you sort of understand it. But yeah, in summary, getting rid of the division between the POC and the data buckets, creating a equation to divide the now macro POC rewards buckets between different wireless protocols, and providing for a cold start bucket so that new protocols have some funding to grow before they have any data used over that specific network. If anybody has any questions, we can do it at the end, or I'll hand it back over to Tushar now.
Yeah, thank you, James. I want to say a few more things, and then we'll open it up to questions. I think that another major benefit of this proposal is that this actually provides more resiliency for the network by having the specific wireless network protocols be separate L2s on the Helium L1. So that means if there is, for whatever reason, an issue on the LoRaWAN protocol, we see the chain halt or something else happens, that does not stop the whole system. The 5G network can continue running uninterrupted during that time, or vice versa. This also means that the code for those L2s can be written in different languages, and we can be a lot more inclusive of many more developers who can then contribute to the Helium ecosystem, because each L2 is effectively a sub DAO for what we're calling the Helium DAO. Helium is basically a massive, decentralized, autonomous organization that creates wireless coverage. And within that DAO, we have sub DAOs, and each of those are relatively independent entities that are tied together by economic bindings, according to what JMF just talked about. But they govern themselves, they write their own code, and we can accept many more of them into the community. And I think this will allow us to grow much faster than not having it. We want to replicate the success of the LoRaWAN network's growth in just 2.5 years. Having over 500,000 hotspots is really phenomenal. And all of this is designed to help make that happen for 5G, for Wi-Fi, for a bunch of other protocols. And we want to expand out to many new protocols building on top of Helium. I'm personally very, very excited about this new economic proposal. This does fundamentally change a lot of how the Helium ecosystem works. So I would just ask to everyone, like, before you start asking us a bunch of questions in Discord, like, please, please, please read the proposals in detail. We really put a lot of thought into these. We've been working on this for months. We've thought about a lot of little details. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's not perfect. We do want your feedback, but just please read through it, because asking questions before reading through it leads to, not the most productive discussion. So please read it in detail. If anyone has any questions, and Jamie, you think we have time for that, we can do that now.
Absolutely. I assume there would be quite a few. So please feel free to, actually, we'll probably need to use the raise hand feature in Zoom if you're familiar, but if anybody has questions, please go ahead.
Hey, Jamie, before we jump into questions, I think it might be useful for folks to hear from Boris at FreedomFi about why a separate sub-DAO for 5G is helpful, because there's some different actors and agents that matter for 5G, like people that understand subscriber lists and things like that. So it might be useful for him to just talk about that a little.
Please, yeah, Boris. Yeah, I know it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, Jamie, thanks. So I can just quickly share my screen, perhaps, and flash one particular part of the HIP 52. So the HIP 52, or maybe it'll be now HIP 53, I'm not sure, is effectively the evolution of the HIP 37 that we proposed. That was somewhat of a accelerator, I would say, for this entire discussion. And it's now been reworked to accommodate for this new structure of sub-DAOs. And one of the important things I wanted to highlight, we'll publish all of that on GitHub, and we'll definitely have an open discussion about this. But the aspects of how important this sort of open governance structure that is independent from the layer 1 protocol is to accommodate new types of networks on top of Helium, I think is illustrated by this table that lists some of the functional and economic roles that are important for the 5G network to work. So just to highlight a couple of them, and this is directly going from HIP 37, what we proposed is that because of how the witnessing function can work in 5G, we've proposed that the witnessing is moved out of the hotspot and into a cell phone, which effectively introduces a new economic agent, a witness, which is very different in terms of its behavior and the reward structure from just another hotspot. And another is around just the very notion of validators. So the validators that we'll need for 5G network will have an expanded role beyond simply serving the consensus group. The validators will be able to act as effectively like a settlement agent for the traffic on the network, as well as an ingress-egress point, an authentication point for the operators that are inbound roaming into the network. So you can see here is the list of kind of like the summary of the different economic agents, and they're different from those that you would see in the LoRa network. And if with HIP 37, we kind of try to kind of like hack our way to figure out how to like make it work in a, you know, LoRa friendly or LoRa exclusive environment. With this new DAO structure, it actually allows us to come up with a much more elegant way to introduce these economic agents to get everybody sort of participate in value creation of the network, and then also have a reward structure that basically is aligned with the value for each of the economic agents in the network. So as again, I mentioned, we'll post all of this publicly to have a more detailed discussion on it, but I wanted to just reiterate that I think it's actually a great step forward for the network in general that will indeed facilitate quite a bit of growth and makes a lot of our work in terms of what we need to build to make 5G on Helium work actually quite a bit easier and more straightforward. So I'll shut up now, and now we can do questions.
Great, amazing. Thank you, Boris, Tushar, James, and everybody else who I assume worked on this. Any questions from the audience? I'm gonna have to just budget about 10 minutes. I'm almost positive we will have an agenda item for this next month as well, so don't feel like this will be the last time.
Just real quick, I wanted to shout out to Cheyenne from the Multicoin team who helped me a lot on this proposal as well. So while we're thanking people, thank you, Cheyenne.
Excellent. No burning questions. I assume folks probably want to digest the many details that y'all have mentioned.
Yeah, we'll have everything up today. I think we're going to have to renumber these HIPs. It seems like someone has already proposed a HIP 50. So it'll be 51 will be the Helium DAO HIP, and then we'll have a 52 for LoRaWAN and a 53 for 5G. Something I'll throw in here is this adds the ability for people to easily propose new wireless network protocols to add, and you can have different pricing models. I think this is really cool. Abhay mentioned this while we were looking at the drafts of this. You can have right now everything on Helium is metered access, so it's all about having paying per byte, but that is not necessarily the only way to pay for connectivity. There are subscriptions for connectivity as well, where you pay one fixed fee and you can get unlimited data. This model can allow you to support those types of alternative pricing models as well, which can also then help kickstart more growth. So just broadly, much more flexibility.
Very cool. We have a question from Robert in the audience. Please go ahead.
Thank you, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My question was in regards to the prioritization of work. When it comes to the resources of Helium Inc., how do you determine which DAO gets what amount of resources? Let's say that there are some improvements or suggestions that might be required or suggested on the LoRaWAN network, and there are some also on the 5G network. How does Helium Inc. plan to balance the workload there?
I could take some of that. So, in general, we don't think that we'll have to be the blocking agent here, right? Like right now, obviously we do a lot with the core chain, but one of the proposals here is that and sorry, I have a 3-year-old all over me. So if you hear a bunch of noise, I'm sorry. But one of the parts of this proposal is that we would allow each sub-DAO to operate, on their own, either using the existing code base or using other chains or like whatever sort of consensus mechanism they decide to implement. That's sort of open for discussion for each sub-DAO, and that's really should be driven through the governance procedures for that DAO. So that's how we would think about it. What this does also do is that this makes the layer 1 much simpler. It's more about block production, payments, data credit burns, and then settlement and bonding curves, right? And so it's a much simpler layer 1 that we're sort of, and one could imagine that we're essentially taking our existing chain, ripping out all the gateway and location information, POC stuff, and just running a much faster block producing chain for layer 1. So that's the details of how this would be implemented would still, it'll take a couple of cycles to even like understand that and start to prioritize that. But we think that each sub-DAO can operate independently with their own consensus mechanisms.
Abai, if your daughter will permit, would this have made the development of light hotspots easier or different, out of curiosity?
Light hotspots are a client, right? Like really, the way we think about light hotspots is that it's a client to validators that already exist. I don't know if it would make it easier or harder, but certainly like, today we have over 500,000 fully functioning blockchain nodes on the network, all speaking gossip and overlap P2P to each other. So like that's what's sort of making it harder to transition. It's our wild success, which is a great high quality problem, I think. But I think I don't know if it would make it better or faster, but I certainly think that you can imagine more kinds of data only hotspots to exist on the network on multiple wireless protocols. Tushar mentioned the idea around the other kinds of networks that meter based on subscribers, right? Like you could have a data credit. You use data credits to pay for your monthly subscriptions, and you get unlimited data. And someone mentioned that in chat as well. That's what this enables, and each DAO can sort of define their own rules, both from a consensus perspective and from sort of like a pricing perspective. And that's I think the sort of great innovation, I think, with this idea.
Tushar, did you want to respond? And then I'd love to throw it to Arjun, who's raised his hand.
Yeah, I want to comment on the dev resources prioritization. I mean, I can't speak for Helium Inc., but I can say that the intention of this proposal is to make it more open for more developers to join the community. That's really important. And like the way that would work is each sub-DAO can have its own code base. So that means if Freedom 5 wants to write the 5G validator code, like they can do that and they don't need Helium Inc. Or if anyone else on this call wants to create a fixed wireless access wireless network protocol to solve the last mile problem of laying fiber to everyone's house, like you can do that, and you can write the code in Rust or something else if you want. And it still is all entirely compatible. So we can have multiple dev teams working in parallel with each other, which I think will accelerate the velocity of development for the whole ecosystem.
All right, the questions have come in now. Arjun, Fark Millips, and Tiago, and then I'll likely have to call it quits on this topic for this month.
Yeah, thanks. Since we've got the authors on the line, and it's easy to sometimes hear things in conversation, what are the biggest, what are the biggest weak points in the author's eyes of the proposal right now? Like what are the unavoidable trade-offs you will, that have been made in thinking through this, just so that the community can start, thinking about those issues specifically?
It's a great question. The first is probably the complexity of communication. This is a big change. We have a very large community, amongst the largest of all communities in crypto. And I think the communication of this is something that we will all need to work on together to make sure that we are properly explaining things to a variety of different levels of sophistication. Right now, this is really, the communication that we have developed so far is for the people on this call. So people who are in the ecosystem, who have a lot of context and understanding. And I think that if we want this to succeed, we need to get the communication right broadly. That's the biggest concern on my mind. I think the system is internally consistent and like everything functions, everything works. I can't comment on the complexity of the engineering work required because I'm not an engineer. However, my understanding from just like an architect point of view is that by opening it up for more varied dev teams to be able to contribute, we should be able to accelerate it. But I would defer to some of the engineers on the call, people like Abhay or Amir, to actually comment on engineering challenges associated with this protocol change as well.
Thank you, Tushar. Mark, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jamie. So this is extremely exciting. There's sort of direct conversations that I've had and we've had at Helium with tier 1 MNOs and MVNOs that sort of drive us down this path to say, like, well, we charge different prices for data. How do we use it on the blockchain? Or, we have our own spectrum. How do we use that in the blockchain? And so this is a fantastic answer for that. My question is, how hard do we think this is going to be to make it easy to use for that target company, right? Like, can we get it to a point where it looks as straightforward as like an ERC contract sort of thing? I'm just sort of thinking about levels of complexity for implementing this for, there's thousands of potential applications outside of core LoRaWAN. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of ways it can play out, right? Like, for example, you hit a really good point of companies that own spectrum being able to use this model to deploy a decentralized wireless network while continuing to own their spectrum and not having to forfeit that ownership, which, no one's going to forfeit, $50 billion worth of spectrum. Like that's just a lot of money to give up. So what this allows is, like, as long as the code is open source, which, I just see as a core value of everything that we do here, right? Like, if I am AT&T, I can come in and I can say, hey, this 5G validator code is really interesting. I want to propose an AT&T 5G sub-DAO that uses AT&T's spectrum. And now you as a user can actually help build out that network if you want to, right? Like, no one's going to force anything, but provide that choice and make sure that everything is interoperable. I think that is the one rule that we are enforcing, is that data credits can pay for data on any network. I think that's really important to make sure that the economic flywheel of the Helium network stays intact and in fact accelerates through this. But I think, Mark, you're thinking directly in the same direction that we are, of like, this enables people to then go fork things. I can go and fork the LoRaWAN validator code and say, actually, the LoRaWAN network today has a blacklist. I don't like that. I think this is bad. I'm going to go and fork that and create my own LoRaWAN 2 network or whatever without that feature. And I'm going to try and, build that out. And because the networks are interoperable, this doesn't harm the consumers, or the consumers are able to still pay with the same data credits to connect on those various networks. And you just are giving people more choice. So I think that this enables forking. It enables more choice. I don't think it's going to be as easy as deploying an ERC20 contract, because you do still need to stand up validators and infrastructure.
Right.
But it becomes a lot easier than starting from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, it also opens up a ton of potential for companies to spring up to actually do the work on behalf of these larger companies in the ecosystem. That's super exciting too. All right, cool. Thanks, Ishar.
Thank you for the great questions. Tiago, you're going to bring us home on this topic.
Okay, not really, because it's something else. It's mainly just naming. I'm getting confused because you keep using the terms L1 and L2s for the different networks. From what I got, unless I missed something, they seem to be independent. You know, they are run by each of their own devices, and they have their own code and their own program that they run. So does this naming scheme make sense? Is it just something temporary, or am I missing something here?
That's a great question. No, we are deliberately using this naming scheme because all of the L1 is the base layer, and that's where the tokens all actually exist. Like all of the addresses, your accounts exist at the L1. You have an address at the L1, and that address holds LoRa tokens, or holds 5G tokens, or holds, Wi-Fi tokens, or whatever other tokens. All transactions actually happen at that L1. That's the thing that's actually processing the transfers. If I send my tokens to Jamie for whatever reason, that is being processed at the L1. The only thing the L2 is actually doing is all of the wireless network protocol specific computation. So Boris mentioned several things that need to happen in a 5G network in order to connect it to traditional telecom carriers. So those validators are responsible for doing that. The 5G validators would be responsible for validating the proof of coverage for 5G hotspots, and then sending the instructions down to the L1 to distribute the 5G tokens to those various addresses. So the only state that exists in L2, if you'll excuse crypto specific terms, is the proof of coverage state and the other wireless network protocol specific state. All of the state that can be shared between the networks, all of that exists at the same shared layer 1. So that way you can have one wallet that holds 5G tokens and holds HNT and holds LoRaWAN tokens and holds data credits, and all of that exists at the same place.
Okay, got it. That makes more sense, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a fascinating proposal. I'll put in a request that I would be curious how the current structure varies from sort of folks' existing understandings of L1, L2 relationships too, since there's so many different variations of L2s, at least in Ethereum land. And Tushar, as always, feel free to send me all of your 5G coins. I happily, anytime. Thank you very much to everybody covering this topic. I'm looking forward to diving in and learning more as well. Then next up, last on our to keep this very exciting, at least for wireless geeks agenda going, is an agenda item just to discuss everything that's happened over the last few weeks with the denial lists. And Scott, I know that you wanted to kind of kick this off. And I don't know if there's a specific agenda in place, but we wanted to have kind of a wider discussion about it on the record. So please feel free to kick us off.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to provide like a general perspective on how DY and kind of from a foundation level is thinking about this. In terms of approaches to gaming in general, like our North Star over here is, as it relates to this, how do we make sure the network continues to drive towards neutrality in the long term? And avoiding scenarios where we have, any entity that could control data flowing through the network. I think everybody is aligned on that here. The immediate goal and kind of what was the momentum behind HIP40 and some of the other approaches to it is how do we minimize any cheating, disincentivize any future cheating? From our point of view, it's still a small percentage of total rewards. So we need to balance out how big the problem is with the nature of the solution. But, we do want to kind of march on in ways that we can combat the problem immediately. So short term, as everybody on this call is aware, Helium shared their own framework for blocking hotspots that was overwhelmingly community endorsed in an on-chain vote. I think it was 2 weeks ago at this point. So the first change that I'm seeing from, and I talked to Abai on this, and he may want to weigh on it, and Neil may have a perspective he wants to share, is to move from that unilateral control to adding multiple signers from within the community to that existing list. I know Helium's already vetted out several people for that responsibility, so this is at least kind of a short-term step on how we continue to combat the issue and minimize problematic issues around cheating. Now, in our view, these are temporary appointments, and it's in the spirit of distributing control. But we're not looking to design full governance around this group of signers, because we're looking at this as a very, this is a short-term fix. We don't want to elect a new batch of signers, because instead we want to see if we can work towards a model that is closer to the idea of decentralized list managers that can be chosen by validators. Joey had put together a framework and a proposal on this that we discussed in the working group call a couple of weeks ago. So also this hypothetically lines up with light hotspots, since the challenger role does migrate over to validators. So want to continue working down that road. It's not something that's fully solved and fully baked. We still need to consider out what the incentives are to maintain and support those lists. That there's not a laziness factor, that lists might be implemented by validators and kind of forgotten, and it's up to Hotspot hosts to chase down and get themselves off list if they're honest actors. So in summary, it's that we have a short-term, what is, yes, a semi-centralized model for a few months, but to keep this active working group in place with strong community participation in a way that we can keep talking about incentives and guidelines for those list providers. Ultimately, I'd love to see this, unwind in the long term as there's a transition from proof of coverage awards to data transfer awards. This becomes less of an issue. But also thinking about between the foundation's own analytics resources, how we can deploy more grants towards thinking about the analytics where we can solve it at a programmatic level. I think that's still what we would all prefer. But just in summary, that we're going to host another working group on this. I had an invitation that just went out to the initial participants for next Wednesday. I know there's some interest in people who want to listen in, so we may have just kind of a listen-only channel, but to keep that discussion structured and organized so we can keep working on a solution longer term. But one, just to at least give a high-level perspective from the foundation on how we're looking at this. Abai, do you have anything you want to add in here, or Neil? I know that you guys both have been kind of driving the effort forward as well.
Yeah, so from our perspective, from Helium's perspective, we are working on implementing, or I guess re-implementing the deny list in a public way. There's a repo that's been published that we're working on. Essentially, it's a coordination repo for all the signers. And I'm not sure why Joe's iPhone is being shared right now. Jamie, I don't know if you want to manage that. Of course, big surprise. But yeah. So the
Lesson 6.
Awesome. Jamie might need
yeah, sorry.
Jamie, you're gonna have to boot.
Oh, we have two. Stand by while I lock the meeting.
Near. You got it.
And so the era of open call ends. Sorry, Abai, would you? My God. How do I apologize, everybody. This is the first time we've had to actually lock everything down. So Helium is too popular. Abai, are you able to? You can unmute. Nobody can unmute now. Stand by. And then if anybody else would like to speak, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you as we go along. Are you able to see the request?
Yeah, I'm back.
There you go.
Thanks, Jamie, and thanks for managing this rowdy bunch that is now target. Of course, chat.
It
will
was
get spam
it
notice.
was just a matter of time. It was just a
Yeah,
matter of
no, of
time.
course.
Yeah.
You know, it's happened early on during the pandemic where everyone was on Zoom and we had a lot of private that people didn't know that they had to lock their meetings down. So, you know, it's at least we're now experts on what to do with this. You don't have to freak out about it. Anyway, so to sort of focus on what I was talking about, you know, what we did was we published a repo that allows folks to be able to look at the deny list that we're going to be publishing alongside the miner. We made some changes to the miner, specifically to do essentially what we were doing before, which is the challengers and control. So this is today, you know, hotspots that are creating challenges. They're in control of preventing other hotspots from submitting witness receipts or targeting other hotspots that are on the list as well for issuing beacons. You know, so if the manufacturer uses the deny list config, it's a configuration file, and you know, again, this is temporary. It verifies the signature on the deny list filter. And the signature today, I think we have 6 signers, one of whom is Helium Inc. And all the others are folks in the community that have been sort of been very, very active. Some of them want to be private about their participation, and others are being public about their participation in signing this list. They are able to look at the list, decide whether or not they want to sign it, and then once we have a signed artifact, it can be uploaded into GitHub and be used automatically by miners. I think that it checks every 6 hours or something like that if there's an updated list, and verifies the signature in order to load it. So yeah, so we think this is a temporary, this is a sort of a temporary a tool. It could be adapted into what the HIP40 deny list would look like, and we think that that's probably what we would propose is, like, you know, you have not just one filter but potentially multiple filters, and validators can use multiple filters. There's a question in the chat around what stops manufacturers from building their own lists. You know, it could certainly happen, and it can happen today. The Helium team has noticed that there are folks that deploy hotspots that have modified the code base on their own hotspot. You know, one particular attack that I found interesting, at least from sort of academically interesting, was they were they were essentially like, if the challenger couldn't find one of their own hotspots, they would drop the challenge and try to issue another challenge.
I have a feeling Abai might be handling something, but Arjun, I'll unmute you if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, was there any discussion of kind of any, this is maybe not in the kind of temporary measure, but in the broader measure, for a disincentive to kind of recklessly add people to the deny list? So either some kind of staking or some way to kind of regulate how people get added to a deny list, so that, you know, there's a proper verification before it's done.
So the list will be entirely public, right? So and so, you know, and if you look at the deny list repo in the Helium, or you can kind of look at, today there's no hotspots on there, but we'll publish it probably today or tomorrow. And it is largely the original group that we had in the private deny list, with a lot of the folks that we mistargeted removed. So we did go through one more time through our methodology to try to figure out, like, what we did wrong there, and we largely removed a lot of those. So yeah, so it's entirely in the public sphere. It's going to be sort of verified by a group of people who volunteered to help. These are folks that have already been very, very active in the POC discussion channel, and so they're already, you know, sort of doing this work publicly. And yeah, so the thing about manufacturers, absolutely, it can happen, but it can happen today. It's not just a manufacturer, but an individual can do it themselves, you know, at scale potentially. So we think that the long-term solution here really is validators doing this, and validators should be managing this this sort of list and going forward. And one of our goals is to continue publishing our research and sort of what we feel the network should the direction of the network should be, but also really want to see multiple actors in the ecosystem to participate in this kind of work. I think that and we'll expand the right now you can only use one deny list on a challenger. We could certainly expand that and allow multiple, right? And that's how validators would likely do it.
And then I'll unmute Low Drag for comment. And then if anybody else has a question, please raise your hand so I can unmute you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, when you mentioned the firmware that was changed to allow them or looking for only their beaconers or challengers, how pervasive was that? And when you find stuff like this, do you collect that data and publish it so that it can be reviewed by others easily?
That particular thing, we felt it was like we didn't know how much it was being used. Given the size of the network, if 10 hotspots are doing this, it's actually fairly hard to see. Once you start to have hundreds of hotspots doing it, you get to notice. I mean, certainly this repository that we found, and it's a publicly available repository. If you look at the forks of Helium Miner and Blockchain Core, that sort of custom firmware seemed to be using some sort of list of hotspots that they had. We didn't get too far into like sort of looking at that list, but yeah, that was like one of those things, which was like if we sort of tell people that we know that that's happening, it sort of makes it harder for that they're just going to keep trying to. At the time, it was harder for us to react quickly to that. That might change, and so if it's possible for us to react quickly going forward, we may just publish it as well. But I think it just really comes down to like, do we have a really rigorous way of iterating on and sort of as people are doing different things in the network, being able to react to those kinds of changes very quickly. And if we are, I think we can certainly publish findings like that. I think people are already publishing their findings. We have folks that are using mappers and finding groups of hotspots that are able to hear a map, sort of a mapper device's GPS signal from hundreds of miles away, which would make no sense unless it was actually part of a network that was not actually where they say they are.
Yeah, it would be good to have like a place where you could see all the discoveries that people have actually researched, and like in one area, kind of like a repository for what's going on.
I'd love to, hear, and not to put Evan or the DY as a whole on the spot, but it would be interesting to have a place to publish these kinds of things. Maybe it's a single, Medium blog, or maybe it's some other kind of collection of these kinds of findings.
And then someone in the chat has mentioned Hotspots, which is this community generated list that attempts to do something like that, including kind of flagging for specific behaviors that they've identified. But I don't know how much overlap there is between that and the live denial list. Low Drag, I'll unmute you if you had another question.
Oh, sorry, the hand didn't go down for some reason.
It's my mistake. My mistake.
Yeah, no, I mean, if there was another place, and especially if it was some sort of place that I'd like to look into places that we start posting stuff that's not going to be able to be censored, or something that's decentralized so that it can't be controlled in the future.
Let's go. I'll do another last call if there's any other. There we go, Arjun. Please go ahead. And then Paul.
Yeah, I think maybe I didn't explain my reasoning clearly, but the proposal that Joey put together I thought was great in terms of kind of a longer term solution to denial list. But one of the things that we have to think about is kind of the reckless adding of hotspots to a denial list. And currently there's no mechanism to say, other than trust of kind of people who are already validators, to say that if you're going to add a list, you've done diligence and you're staking monetary value to that hotspot being your confidence level in terms of that hotspot being a gamer. And so I think there needs to be some kind of mechanism to say, if you're going to make a claim or add something to a denial list, that if that turns out to be not true, you're going to lose something because you didn't do your diligence. In terms of kind of a long-term mechanism. Otherwise, you can just have people kind of bad actors coming in and adding people to denial lists without any kind of any recourse. You know what I mean? Just because maybe they want their earnings to go up, whatever their reasoning is. You know what I mean? It could be something silly. So that's all.
One thing that might be helpful, I don't know if this actually answers your question either, but like one thing that might be helpful is that one of the implementation ideas that we've had for the HIP40 validated denial list proposal is the actual data on the validator that voted to deny one of the witness receipts or a challenge as a whole. That data is on chain, right? And so even if like you are a minority and you decide that, hey, like I'm going to ban everyone but my own hotspots, if you're the validator that made that vote goes into the block. And now that's, it might not be acted upon because there isn't consensus in the validator group, the 43 or the 42 other validators that were in the consensus group at the time. So, but like your vote's there and it's public, and potentially we could take that into account in the future, with some kind of slash on the stake as well. So that's one thing that we can do, but at the very least, the initial idea around implementation has been that we would make those validator votes public.
Paul, please unmute and go ahead. It'll prompt you to accept my unmute request. Disregard. Alan, please.
I have a small question. Like, I'm trying to be really up to date with everything that's going on with the network. Like when there is a voting, when there is a new IP, when there is a proof of coverage update. But at the moment, I still need to research it through Discord, find out about this date, and it would be nice if there will be like a very precise timeline already from the starting of the network to basically know every day that something happening to the deployment, or if the network is down, or if a manufacturer do a firmware release, if it will be possible to create this sort of community timeline with all the events that happen. But I think it's also very interesting for analytics, like to basically to try to understand what's happening with the network. Also in the past, like and it can be something like a community. The community helps to keep this list active, or
sounds like
that. But I think
you know,
it will be
having
very
having a
interesting.
historian, right? Like is kind of an interesting idea here, right? Like having someone actually reporting on what's happened in the chain in the past and what's going to come forward in the future, and that certainly could be a I don't know, Scott or Jess, like if that sounds like a good grant.
I agree. I think that'd be wonderful. I'm sure they're attempting to unmute to agree as well. And then the Helium docs site would also be potentially possibly too canonical of a source for something like this, but that's another idea. And there's been a few projects kind of like this. The data analysis channel has some historicals for this around like key dates, but certainly not comprehensive. Paul, glad you got the button working. Please go ahead with you. I think you'll be our last question for the day.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm a little bit out of my league. I just wanted to congratulate all of you on your milestone of over 500,000 miners out there. Just a suggestion. I know this is a wonderful evolution that we're in. This may be far-fetched, but do you think it's possible when the manufacturers roll out more miners that they could possibly validate the installations of where they are going rather than just shipping out 120 to someone that's going to sell them on eBay and you don't know where they're going and what they're doing. I understand the concept of decentralization, but it will eliminate a lot of problems in the future for L2 participants. You know, do it at a manufacturing level at the hardware end. It's just a suggestion. And thank you very much for your time and your devotion. I appreciate it.
Such kind words. If Abaya is busy, I'll just speak on his behalf that I know that it's logistically complex and in some ways probably works against the spirit of the project to kind of police every individual installation. And then even being able to plan in advance like that is not necessarily possible. So an interesting idea, but at that point, we're starting to approach just a regular telecom company. Sue, I apologize. We'll have to bump you to next week just because we're at time. I'd like to very much thank everybody for attending, minus the folks who are causing trouble. And a big thank you to all of our presenters. And I believe for the last time, this will be the part I will just ask all to unmute. And feel free to unmute and say goodbye. Thank you. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you,
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Doodles.
All right.
Adios.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for doing
I heard it's Chris.